think a lot of you I've gotten a chance to talk to or even meet in person at some point. I work as the Willamette Basin TMDL coordinator in the upper Willamette, so the upper part of the watershed. And today speaking with me is Andrea Motzke at the other end of the watershed.
I know, we kind of are at the top and bottom of the watershed. Hi all, Andrea Motzke, and I'm the Lower Willamette Basin coordinator. So I work with a lot of the DMAs in the Portland metro area, and I'll be working with a lot of the new DMAs along the Multnomah Channel. So Scappoose and St. Helens and Columbia County, as well as some of the water conveyance districts. So I look forward to working with all of you.
And later in the presentation, we will share a slide with you with the names and contact information of our other basin coordinators. They are on the call today, and they'll get an opportunity to say hi in just a little bit.
All right, so next we're going to hand it over to Steve Mrazek, the Northwest Region Watershed Manager, for some opening remarks.
Good morning, everybody. This is fantastic. I see the participant number keep rising. I think we have 111. This is outstanding. So welcome, everybody. Like Sarah mentioned, my name is Steve Mrazek. I'm a water quality manager in our Northwest Region office. And one of the teams that I manage is a watersheds group. And so Andrea is part of that team, and there's a bunch of other basin coordinators that are part of that group that will be working with all of you. Often the regions focus on some implementation activities, and in this case, related to this TMDL, they'll be working really closely with you. I'd also like to kind of acknowledge and introduce a colleague, Zach Lowboy. So Zach is my counterpart in the Western region. So Zach also has a watersheds team. He works in Eugene, and so on behalf of both of us, so again, we really appreciate your presence and your participation in this workshop today. This one is the first in a series of 5 different workshops that's focusing on new designated management agencies and responsible persons. So, but I also noticed there are some seasoned DMAs, or DMAs, that's right. DMAs is just designated management agencies for all the new folks. I apologize, we sometimes use that acronym, but welcome to everybody, whether you're already have engaged with us over the years, or if you're new, welcome to everybody. Just like I mentioned, this is the first in a series of kind of focused workshops. There's also going to be some workshops that are upcoming that focus on kind of MS4 communities, some for small cities, some for counties, and other water conveyance entities. So please attend those workshops as are appropriate for you. You know, the Willamette, as the most populous basin in the state, there are numerous agencies and jurisdictions who will be working towards reducing mercury in Oregon's waterways so that folks can safely consume fish and shellfish. I believe there are 172 that have been identified in this particular TMDL. And I just want to acknowledge it. It really is everybody's collective efforts moving forward, whether you have a larger or a lesser role. It really is going to take all of us collectively. And I just want to again say thank you so much in advance for all the work that folks are about to embark on. I think also just we want to acknowledge to reduce mercury. I think we acknowledge it's going to take many years to do this. And so again, that collective incremental efforts that we're all going to be taking part of to reduce runoffs and erosion containing mercury will make a difference over time. As Priscilla and Andrea mentioned earlier, the Willamette Basin coordinators will be working closely with all of you to answer your questions you may have, especially for those of you that are new designated management agencies or DMAs or RPs. There are a bunch of guidance documents on the DEQ website that can point you in the right direction for developing your TMDL implementation plans, and how to report on your implementation progress every year. Let's see, I want to make sure, each one of the DMAs and responsible persons have been assigned to a specific basin coordinator. The letter you received from DEQ in March includes the name of your particular basin coordinator contact that's been assigned to you in your jurisdiction. I just want to just acknowledge, like I mentioned before, there's 172 different groups, and so all the basin coordinators will be trying to certainly reach out to you all, but it's really important as well for all of us to be connected. So we encourage you to please be proactive and reach out to your basin coordinator and just make sure we have some good open lines of communication. The TMDL, it is a regulatory program. So DEQ does have enforcement capabilities related to approving these TMDL implementation plans, as well as the updates that occur at different frequencies. There's annual reporting and some other 5-year review reporting requirements, and also just assessing kind of that sustained progress. In turn, those basin coordinators will ensure that they're working very closely with all the DMAs to make sure that they're aware of what those reporting requirements are and expectations for that successful TMDL implementation plan. And again, I just want to really acknowledge this is a huge commitment of time and resources. And I just want to acknowledge that there's all sorts of priorities that you all are working on. And we very much appreciate just the investment that all of us are making collectively to ensure that we have a healthy Willamette watershed moving forward. So thank you very much. I guess with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Priscilla and Andrea and others to kind of lead you through the rest of this workshop. Hopefully, it should give you a great overview of what the TMDL program is, as well as touch on the Mercury TMDL, which obviously brought you all here today, or many of you. So thanks again for attending, and I know we'll be talking more, so welcome.
Great, thanks, Steve. Hey, Sarah, how's it look? Can you see my slide?
You look perfect.
Okay. Yeah, so thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. Most of you on the call today are here because you represent a designated management agency, or DMA, or a responsible person named in the Willamette Basin Mercury TMDL. So today's presentation, like Steve mentioned, is the first of 5 that we're going to do through May and in early June. And each one of these sessions is focused on a specific audience. So the objective for the presentation today is to share an introduction to the TMDL program, developing a TMDL, and the responsibilities associated with implementing a TMDL for our new DMAs. But we have a lot of folks on the line that have been doing this with us for a while, so hopefully this information will be a good refresher for you as well. Andrea is going to introduce the Mercury TMDL toward the end of today's presentation. But again, today we're focused on an introduction to the overall TMDL program, and more Mercury specific implementation information will be shared at upcoming sessions that we're having over the next couple of months. So based on the RSVP list, it did look like we had a number of folks that were joining us that had been doing this for a while. So I was curious, here we have a poll question for you. Sarah's gonna put up a poll here, and I'm wondering how you guys feel. Do you feel like you are familiar with the total maximum daily load program? See, oh, things are moving around. Let's see here. Yes, we're coming in around, let's see, 50%, 54% say yes, they're familiar with the program, 14% say no, and 34% hanging around sort of. So that's a pretty even slice and dice of the audience today, but more than half of you feel like you're familiar with it. So again, this will be a refresher for you and for others on the line. I think the information we share today is going to help you get the ball rolling in terms of next steps with implementation. All right, thanks, Sarah. Appreciate that. All right, so today we're going to talk to you about the regulatory framework that results in TMDLs and what TMDLs are and the responsibilities that DMAs and responsible persons have under a TMDL. So this all starts with the Federal Clean Water Act. The Federal Clean Water Act was originally initiated in the 1940s, and it was called the Federal Pollution Control Act at that time. In 1972, though, a number of amendments were adopted, and at that time, we started referring to this Pollution Control Act as the Federal Clean Water Act. And the Federal Clean Water Act establishes the framework for regulating discharges of pollutants to surface waters, and it also regulates water quality standards. So the CWA requires states, including Oregon, to adopt water quality standards and then make a list of impaired water bodies every 2 years. And these impaired water bodies are surface water bodies that don't meet water quality standards. So you'll often hear this list of impaired water bodies referred to as the 303D list. And 303D just refers to the section of the Clean Water Act. So states have to develop pollution reduction plans or clean water plans, also called total maximum daily loads, to help reduce pollutant loading in our watershed. So where do TMDLs come from? How do they fit into the Clean Water Act regulatory framework? Well, we start by adopting water quality standards to help us meet our water quality goals. And our goals are to be able to use surface water bodies for things like drinking water, fishing, providing for fish and aquatic life habitat, and other beneficial uses. So once we adopt water quality standards to protect these beneficial uses, we then collect water quality data, and we assess those data against the water quality standards to determine whether or not our streams, our rivers, and our lakes are meeting their applicable standards. Those that don't meet the standards, we identify as impaired, and we place them on the 303D list of impaired waters. And from that list, we develop and ultimately implement total maximum daily loads or pollution reduction plans for impaired waters. So what is a total maximum daily load? Well, a TMDL is a number, and it's the maximum amount of a pollutant that a water body can assimilate. TMDL is the result of a science-based approach that uses water quality monitoring, other field collected environmental data, and modeling to calculate how much of any one pollutant a water body can assimilate and still meet its water quality standard or standards. We use the TMDL development process to help figure out where pollutant loading is coming from, how much we have to reduce it by in order to meet a water quality standard, and who's responsible for helping reduce pollutant loading. So who's responsible to reduce pollutant loading is categorized into two different areas. So these are sources of pollutant that are either classified as non-point source or point sources of pollution. So this is just an illustration of different types of sources of pollution. And on the right, we have examples of non-point sources of pollution. And these include stormwater runoff from agricultural and timberland uses, as well as stormwater runoff from urban or built environments. Stormwater runoff and discharge that falls under the jurisdiction of our NPDES permit program is considered a point source. And our municipal separate storm sewer system, or MS4 program, regulates stormwater runoff from these permittees. Other point sources of pollution regulated by our permit program include runoff and discharges from industrial facilities and wastewater treatment plants. And you can see these represented on the left side of this illustration. Identifying pollutant sources is one component or element of developing a TMDL. The other components include figuring out what the loading capacity is for a river or stream that's impaired. And the loading capacity represents the maximum amount of pollution that a system can receive and still meet its water quality standards. So excess load then is the amount of pollutant beyond the loading capacity. After we calculate how much excess pollution there is, we then figure out which sources have to reduce their pollutant loading. And allocations represent the reductions that point sources and non-point sources of pollution have to achieve in order for a stream or a surface body of water to meet its water quality standards. So after doing the math behind that total maximum daily load, we then describe in the water quality management plan who has to do what in order to meet the pollutant load reductions or allocations of the TMDL. So how do we get from point A to point B, and who's going to get us there? That's what we talk about in the TMDL water quality management plan. This is just a conceptual image of stream loading capacity. So when there's an excess pollutant load, point sources and non-point sources have to reduce their pollution contribution. How point sources and non-point sources will reduce their pollution contribution is described in the TMDL water quality management plan. So what's in this water quality management plan? Well, it is defined and laid out specifically in Oregon Administrative Rule. The water quality management plan is part of the TMDL, and it describes who's responsible for implementing pollution reductions and how they're going to do it. So Oregon Administrative Rule identifies 15 different required components of a TMDL. This includes identifying designated management agencies and responsible persons. And again, these are the entities that have a legal responsibility to implement pollution reductions. And the water quality management plan also proposes strategies for these DMAs and responsible persons that will help them reduce their pollutant loading. The water quality management plan provides reasonable assurance as well that the management strategies that we've recommended, if implemented, will be successful in reaching our TMDL load allocations. And we're going to do this either through our regulatory and enforcement authorities or through voluntary actions. And most often we do it through a combination of both. So as Steve mentioned earlier, the Mercury, Willamette Basin Mercury TMDL Water Quality Management Plan identifies 172 different designated management agencies and responsible persons that must implement the non-point source allocation or non-point source reduction for mercury and mercury-related pollutants. Something unique to the new Willamette Basin Mercury TMDL from the original 2006 TMDL is that we've named irrigation and drainage districts as responsible persons. So these types of water conveyance entities have been implementing TMDLs in other basins in Oregon for a number of years. but it is new for us here in the Willamette Basin to include them in our TMDL implementation. So as a side note, if you are present on the line today and you represent an irrigation or drainage district, please be sure to join our Zoom session scheduled for June 8th. In that session, we are going to be talking specifically about implementation expectations for irrigation and drainage districts. Of course, anyone on the line is welcome to join us on the 8th. I especially want to see a good turnout from our irrigation and drainage districts. So the Water Quality Management Plan, it identifies how DMAs and responsible persons will use TMDL implementation plans to guide and describe what steps they're going to take to reduce non-point sources of pollution. So I mentioned our permit program earlier when talking about TMDL development and point sources of pollution. The Water Quality Management Plan also includes a description of how NPDES permits, like the MS4 permit, will be used to reduce point sources of pollution and address that waste load allocation assigned to point sources. Today, though, we are focused on non-point source implementation, and the regulatory tool identified in Oregon Administrative Rule and the Water Quality Management Plan is the TMDL implementation plan. That's our tool for planning and implementing, tracking and documenting non-point source efforts that reduce pollution. So developing and implementing a TMDL implementation plan is a regulatory requirement for DMAs and responsible persons. It's not a permit, it doesn't operate just like a permit, but it is a regulatory requirement. So most of you on this call today, like Steve mentioned earlier, received a letter in March, and that letter identified an 18-month timeline for submitting an implementation plan to DEQ for approval. For some of you, this means updating a plan you already have in place, but for a number of you, this will be the first time that you write a plan. But keep in mind that these plans are written to forecast 5 years of implementation activities, and they are updated on a 5-year cycle. So once you develop a plan, it will not be the last time that you work on that plan. We will work with you every 5 years to update that plan and make sure that it is up to date and relevant to implementation moving forward. So TMDL implementation plans also include a number of components. They have to identify the management strategies and on-the-ground actions that DMAs and responsible persons are going to take to reduce pollutant loading. They also have to provide a timeline for implementing these actions and describe how these actions are going to be tracked so that implementation progress can be measured. State land use requirements and other types of information specified in the Water Quality Management Plan also have to be included. So remember that DEQ's Water Quality Management Plan recommends management strategies that, if fully implemented, will reduce pollutant loading. But the appropriate strategies differ between different sources and different jurisdictions. And the DMA and responsible person implementation plans identify the specific actions that a DMA or a responsible person will take to reduce their contribution to pollutant loading. So this is just an example or an excerpt from a DMA implementation plan matrix. So a lot of DMAs include a table like this in their implementation plan as an efficient way to identify and summarize what, when, and how actions will be implemented to reduce pollutant loading. And in this example, at the top, you can see that streets, sidewalks, and other impervious surfaces have been identified as a source of bacteria, mercury, and mercury-related pollutants through stormwater runoff. And by regularly sweeping these surfaces on a consistent schedule, we're able to reduce some of those pollutants from entering the stormwater system and then entering rivers, streams, other surface water bodies. You'll see that this DMA is also identified a timeline for when they implement this measure. And here they're sweeping roads once a month, and they're sweeping side streets quarterly or as needed. Something else you'll see here in the far right-hand column is a cost estimate or a funding column. And this particular DMA has to spend about $8,000 a year to operate and maintain their street sweeping program. And this is something that is been better defined in the new Willamette Basin Mercury TMDL Water Quality Management Plan compared to the 2006 plan. The new Water Quality Management Plan is more specific about including cost estimates for implementing strategies and actions. So these cost estimates include staff time, maintenance activities, project costs, outreach, etc. Some DMAs have figured out a pretty good way to track the cost of implementing their plan. Some DMAs are still struggling in this area, but moving forward, we do have an expectation that a cost estimate is provided. So we know what the funding needs are for implementing the Mercury TMDL. And we generally use a 5-year time frame. I mentioned earlier, implementation plans are updated every 5 years. And so we anticipate DMAs providing cost estimates on at least a 5-year basis. So I want to point you to our TMDL implementation webpage. There are a number of guidance documents available to help get you started on developing a TMDL implementation plan, guidance for how to successfully implement a TMDL, and there's some other resources on there as well. So definitely check out that webpage. Something Steve, though, already mentioned, I want to reiterate, is that everyone who is a designated management agency or responsible person has been assigned a basin coordinator. And so please consider your basin coordinator as a resource available to you for answering questions and helping you develop an approvable TMDL implementation plan. Check out the webpage, look through those resources, but also do not hesitate to call, email, or set up a meeting with your basin coordinator. We are here to help you through this process. All right, so with that introduction to TMDLs, we're going to take a pause here for questions. So if you have any questions about the TMDL program or how we develop and implement TMDLs, now's a good time to put those in the chat box. Sarah can read those out. And then once we move through the questions in the chat box, we can take questions over the line, verbal questions as well.
All right, Priscilla, looks like we've got a question. What does it mean when a water body is listed as impaired, but not listed as 303D?
So the list of impaired water bodies is the 303D list. So we use various terms to refer to the same phenomenon. So if a stream or river isn't meeting its water quality standards, we might say that that stream is impaired, which is the same as saying it's 303D listed, which is the same as saying it's category 5. All of those terms mean the same thing, which is this stream or water body is not meeting its water quality standards.
All right, another question. What basis does DEQ use to approve implementation plans? For example, if we sweep streets every 2 months as opposed to every month?
That's a good question. So at a minimum, your implementation plan has to address all of the components that are listed in Oregon Administrative Rule. The strategy, when you're going to implement it, how you're going to track successful implementation, the cost of implementing that strategy. So those overall requirements are in OAR. The nice thing about a TMDL implementation plan, though, is that it allows for implementation flexibility. And this is where, as a DMA or a responsible person, there is a responsibility on your end to assess and thoughtfully consider how best to implement a specific strategy to reduce your contribution to pollutant loading. So if you have a street sweeping program that sweeps streets once a month, as part of your tracking and documentation, you should be assessing whether or not that is enough. And if once a month isn't enough, then consider sweeping more often. If you find that sweeping once a month is more often than you need to control for the leaf litter and the dust and the other types of materials that collect in your stormwater system, then you can reduce that schedule. But there's no hard yes or no answer to is 1 month enough, is 2 months enough. That's part of the tracking and assessment process that you'll do and report back to your basin coordinator. So flexibility in the implementation plan to design strategies that help reduce pollutant loading, but also are within the capacity of the DMA to implement.
All right, we've got at least 2 more here. How does DEQ, okay, sorry, everything's moving on me. How does DEQ determine what water bodies to start collecting data on to determine if it is impaired?
That's a really good question. One I'm not prepared probably to answer to the extent that you'd like. You know, we have water quality monitoring programs that monitor certain sites on a regular basis. And so we're able to track water quality statewide through those different programs. We do also conduct specific water quality monitoring prior to TMDL development. How we go about that selection, though, I'm not prepared to speak to. I'll have to follow up with you. Andrea, do you have an idea of how we identify where we might do focused water quality monitoring for TMDL development?
No, I think you covered that pretty well. You know, it depends if we're in, you know, we're beginning to initiate TMDL development and we can collect data ahead of time. You know, we have our toxics monitoring program and we have our ambient monitoring sites that we've been monitoring some of these sites for years, you know, over time. But also we get this data from you all, you know, from the cities, from watershed councils, from different volunteer groups that have submitted data to us. So as long as the data that's submitted to us passes the appropriate quality assurance, we will use it to assess water body status for impairments.
All right, there's another related question. Is testing performed upstream and downstream of DMAs for TMDL to start a baseline?
So we do not specifically perform water quality monitoring directly upstream and downstream of each DMA's jurisdiction. But we do have an extensive water quality monitoring network, but that network does not provide for upstream and downstream monitoring of every DMA.
All right, next question. Do you expect the state will provide any funding opportunities to local jurisdictions to plan development or implementation of future operations?
So we have not set aside funding just for the purpose of helping DMAs, responsible persons, develop implementation plans. However, we do have a 319 non-point source grant program. And you'll find in the request for proposals every year a table of the types of projects that we consider for funding through our 319 program. And assisting with TMDL implementation is one of the things that we fund through that program. If you're working on developing an implementation plan, the best resource that we have to offer you right now is the technical assistance that Basin coordinators can provide. So there's still going to be staff time on your end that you have to dedicate to the process that you may not have taken into consideration in terms of funding. But if you work closely with your Basin coordinator, we will be able to help you streamline and make that process more efficient.
So another related question, will the cost estimates for implementation plans be used for anything other than informing DEQ?
That's a great question. Actually, when I get asked about cost estimates, it's most often from designated management agencies. So that is information that we will use, but it is also information that we will share with you in the future so that when you're planning, you have an idea of the cost associated with the different types of strategies that DMAs and responsible persons are implementing.
Yeah, and this is Andrea. I just wanted to chime in. You know, part of that, the cost estimates, it's not really just for DEQ, but it's to help DMAs with their own planning. So with this looking forward 5 years and estimating the cost for staff, you know, involved to do this work, or if there's any on the ground work, any money you need to ask from your city councils or other boards, you know, it gives you an opportunity to start planning ahead and thinking about how to support and implement your program. So part of it is really for the DMA's purpose as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I've got just a couple more here and then we can get back to the presentation. Is adaptive management still a factor in ongoing implementation?
I'm sorry, can you read that one more time?
Is adaptive management still a factor in ongoing implementation?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, adaptive management is an integral part to TMDL implementation. That's where that tracking and documentation and assessment comes in. The expectation is that as we move through this process and as we implement, we learn what works, we learn what doesn't work, we learn how to improve things that we're doing. And so as you implement, there's always the expectation that you use adaptive management to refine and get better at implementing pollution reduction strategies.
All right, thanks, Priscilla. So I'll read two more and then we'll hold off on questions until the end of the presentation. So, question, where do we find information on river status in your local jurisdiction?
Yeah, so DEQ actually has a lot of really awesome tools available online now. And if you go to our website, you can look at, there's a couple different applications you can use. The first is our integrated report assessment database. So you can access that as essentially a table of data and information, or you can use an interactive web map and you can click on the map where your jurisdiction is and pull up the listing information or the pollutant impairments for the rivers and streams that are in or near your jurisdiction. So go to our website and check out DEQ's assessment database or interactive web map. We also have something on our website called Water Quality Status and Trends. It's another interactive web map that you can click on and pull up data available for various water bodies. So you can actually look at graphs of different water quality data we've collected just by clicking on the map.
All right, last question. What is the impact from air quality out of the state? In 08, DEQ Air Quality Division stated 18% was coming from out-of-state sources. Since 08, the number of coal-burning power plants in China are up by 58% and India by 121%. We can't stop it from raining in Oregon. So this is bigger than us. Thoughts, strategies, put pressure on the feds?
So Shane came prepared with some numbers and facts today. I can't speak to the specific percents that you shared. I'd have to go back and review those or look those up to confirm. But you are right in that most of the mercury deposited in Oregon comes from air deposition from global sources. And the TMDL addresses that and accounts for that. While air deposition from global sources is our largest source of mercury, most of that mercury is deposited on the land. Some of it, and the model accounts for this, some of it ends up directly being deposited into surface bodies of water, but most of it ends up deposited on the land. And so for implementation of the Mercury TMDL, we are focused on keeping soil and sediment in place. Keep it on the land and out of the water. So you're right, we can't stop global sources and air deposition from those sources necessarily, but we can take on the ground actions to keep soil in place. The Mercury TMDL also talks about nationally some things that are happening at EPA level that could benefit reducing mercury emissions. But as far as implementation for us here in the basin, we're going to stay focused on reducing sediment erosion and runoff.
All right, that is all the questions. Thank you everybody for asking great questions. Now I think we're going to hand it over to Andrea.
Yes, you can hear me, right?
We can.
Okay, I am actually going to turn off my camera because it is very finicky, and then I'll just turn it back on at the end of the presentation. All right, so thanks, Priscilla, and thanks for all those really good questions. We had some great questions there, and like the last question especially too, I'm going to cover it a little bit. So in this last part of the presentation, I want to focus a little bit on reporting. So Priscilla mentioned some reporting related to the TMDL. I'm going to touch on enforcement a little bit and then give an overview of the Mercury TMDL. So I won't go into a lot of details there, but just give a little introduction to the Mercury TMDL since that is why you are all here. Okay, so now, there we go. Okay, so Priscilla touched on this. So reasonable assurance, which is a required part of the TMDL. So the definition here, it's a demonstration that a TMDL will be implemented by a federal, state, or local government or individuals through regulatory or volunteer actions, through strategies. So this is a really important part of the TMDL. So you can develop a TMDL, but what is the reasonable assurance that it will get implemented? And so this is where you all come in, as well as DEQ, in assuring that the TMDL is implemented over time. And we use this, whoops, what happened? This went ahead, sorry. This is a regulatory sort of, or at least a framework for looking at how we determine reasonable assurance. So if we start at the top with pollutant reduction strategies, Some of these reduction strategies are in the water quality management plan. So there's some general reduction strategies depending on your jurisdiction and your sector of what will help reduce the pollutant in question. And we've been talking about mercury here. But the implementation plans that each of the DMAs develop are more specific to the reduction strategies that you will implement, you know, what works for your jurisdiction, and then through adaptive management, those can change over time. So moving to the right, the TMDL has identified DMAs, and we know this is the Willamette Basin, so many people, so many agencies in this basin, 172. This is huge. It's a huge TMDL with many, many people involved. So that is part of this reasonable assurance, is ensuring that the potential pollution sources are included in the TMDL. Then moving down to timelines and targets and developing measurable objectives. So we have some of these timelines already in the water quality management plan, but additional timelines specific to your TMDL implementation plan will also be needed as you develop those plans. DEQ's part, moving down this circle here, is evaluating those implementation plans and the progress that DMAs are making. So DEQ will be approving, the basin coordinators will be approving those TMDL implementation plans. And moving around to the left, enforcement. So we do have enforcement discretion on TMDL implementation and timely submittal of annual reports. So although it's not our first like line in terms of reaching out to DMAs, it's not our first option in terms of enforcement, but we definitely can, and we have been doing that more. So that is part of this reasonable assurance. And then moving up, DEQ is going to be tracking water quality for mercury in this case. So we'll be looking at total mercury in the water. We'll be looking at methyl mercury in fish. And we'll also be using total suspended solids, which is a surrogate for total mercury. So we will be tracking over time and potentially including DMAs in some of that tracking over time. We do have a draft framework in place for this monitoring strategy. It's on our website with the TMDL. Some of you may have taken a look at that already. It's still in a draft stage, but we do expect that we'll focus on some of those higher, the subbasins that are higher up in the basin that have water quality data associated with it, and then slowly work our way down the basin to the main stem and then to the lower part of the Willamette, and how we're tracking non-point source and point source implementation actions and seeing how that relates to any mercury reductions in water bodies. And we'll likely look to our EPA guidance as we do that, but there'll be more to come about that later. Okay, annual reports. After you've developed your TMDL implementation plan, you will be submitting annual reports to your basin coordinator. And that's just simply as, what did you do that year? We have a matrix that's included. Priscilla showed a little bit of that table in her presentation, but basically it's at the very end of a TMDL implementation plan. And it's a table of all your strategies you're using to reduce mercury. And then you're going to have measurable objectives associated with those. You're going to have timelines of when you're going to get that done. And then you'll have your status for that year. And generally that's what basin coordinators are going to be looking at, is that status column. Some of the DMAs provide a lot more information about what they did that year, and that's fine as well. But you can work with your basin coordinator to determine what works best for the basin coordinator and the DMAs. But the whole idea is that you're submitting progress from that year. Some of the reporting dates are going to be different. So, again, connect with your basin coordinator. They might have ideas for you when they would like your reporting date to be, but you know, if that doesn't work out for you for some reason or another, you know, just work with your Basin coordinator to come up with a date. But the important part is that you know when your reporting date is. Please then post your annual reports and your TMDL implementation plans to your city website. So this is all part of public transparency. So if you do not have a website, you know, you might be able to figure out some other way of getting information to citizens, and it could be at some of the city offices or something where you have copies. But generally, a website is a good way to go in terms of creating public transparency. 5-year reviews. Priscilla mentioned this briefly, but every 5th year, instead of submitting an annual report, DMAs take a look back over their last 4 years of implementation and then provide a summary of that implementation progress to Basin coordinators. Now, we've done this differently over the years, but the last 5-year review, which was in 2018, we used a Survey Monkey to do that. And I think people thought that was pretty, pretty easy to submit that information. And then once we get that information, we assess whether progress was sufficient over those years. This is also the time, and Priscilla had mentioned this as well, where you update your TMDL implementation plan. So it's not a one and done with implementation plan development. It's always a work in progress. You know, as you review some of the implementation strategies over the past years, you just might find that, you know, it might not be cost effective anymore, or it's just really not, you know, very successful in terms of these BMPs. That's all part of the adaptive management process. So this is your opportunity to update your implementation plan and look forward for the next 5 years, and then also do your cost estimates at the same time. The next 5-year review for the Willamette Basin is in 2023, and that is for most of the DMAs. So we're trying to keep to a set 5-year schedule. The last 5-year schedule or 5-year review was in 2018. So that's for most of the DMAs. However, if you're a DMA in the Molalla Pudding or some of the upper Willamette DMAs, your 5-year review time might be different, and it probably is different. So again, connect with your Basin coordinators so you know when your 5-year review is due. And as I mentioned already, for the last 5-year review, we used a Survey Monkey. So we had the Basin coordinators, we sent out the Survey Monkey, the DMAs filled it out, submitted it to the Basin coordinators, and we were able to look at that implementation progress over the last 4 years. It's also easier for the Basin coordinators to wrap up that data, and we use that data to develop a 5-year report, and that's what DEQ develops. So we develop a 5-year report and we post it to the website, and our copy of that 5-year review is currently on our website. Enforcement. So again, we do have discretion, you know, under our Division 12 rules to for DMAs that are, you know, fail or timely submit TMDL implementation plans. You know, again, this is not our first option with DMAs. We don't want to go to enforcement first. We like to use technical assistance and work with the DMAs. But this option is definitely out there, and we have started using it in certain circumstances. So just, you know, something to keep in mind, you know, you might get a warning letter. So if you do not submit on time, you submit an annual report late, or you ask for extensions a lot, or you submit the annual report and implementation plan and it's not sufficient and we have to ask for many reviews, you know, that could result in a warning letter. And if it's not fixed, it could actually lead to penalties over time. So that was finishing out, you know, what is, you know, the whole TMDL program and what are the different components of a TMDL program and reporting. The next slides, I'm just going to touch. It's a high-level overview of the Mercury TMDL. You know, again, that's why you are all here. I am not going to go into any of the technical components of the Mercury TMDL, you know, the modeling, the source assessment. There's a lot of good information in DEQ's TMDL document as well as EPA's TMDL document. So if you want to get into the nuts and bolts of that, you can dive into those documents and get those details. The next slides, again, I'm just going to do an overview. For the workshops, we'll go into the implementation details. But again, we're not going to talk about the technical aspects of the TMDL. So why are greater reductions necessary? So Oregon standard, we have a standard, it's for methyl mercury, and it's actually measured in fish and shellfish. This is our only water quality standard that's actually measured in fish tissue. And that's because methyl mercury, which is the most toxic form of mercury to humans, is found in fish and shellfish. And so that's how we're exposed to toxicity from mercury, is from eating fish and shellfish. So our criterion reflects that. It's measured in fish tissue. And we also have a very protective criterion in Oregon. It's one of the most protective across the country, and it allows for a safe consumption of up to 23 8-ounce servings of fish caught in Oregon waters per month. So that's kind of how that 0.040 milligrams per kilogram equates to. Sometimes that's kind of hard to picture in your mind. So think of it as being able to eat 23 8-ounce servings of fish per month. In 2011, we updated our methyl mercury fish tissue criterion, and that's about 8 times more stringent than what it was in 2006. And so 2006 was when our first Mercury TMDL was developed. So in 2011, when we adopted the more protective fish tissue criterion, that was one of the reasons why we had to update the Mercury TMDL. Because it was much more stringent. So we had to change the TMDL to adjust to the new criterion. So we have protection of humans, and then we also have protection of aquatic life. So 2 criteria here. The other one is measured, and it's a total mercury concentration that's measured in the stream, in the water water column, and that's 0.012 micrograms per liter. And because of the stringency of this criterion, large reductions of mercury are needed across the Willamette Basin. So mercury, you know, it's a naturally occurring element. It's found in many industries, forest fires, different products, and they persist in the environment. And as I mentioned, the most toxic form of mercury is this methylated form. And that can be methylated through various processes, you know, microbial processes or low oxygen conditions in sediment. So we are actually focusing on a target of total mercury, knowing that total mercury can be converted to this toxic form in different ways. And methyl mercury becomes concentrated as it moves up the food chain. So older fish, larger fish, and resident fish. So resident fish such as like bass or northern pipe minnow that live year-round in Oregon waters, they're going to tend to accumulate more mercury than, say, anadromous fish, you know, like salmon and steelhead that are only in Oregon waters for a certain amount of the year. And we touched, I think this is one of our last questions. Someone had asked about, well, you know, we've heard a lot of the mercury's coming from atmospheric deposition and not necessarily from a lot of sources in Oregon. And that is true. Most of the mercury is coming from outside the Willamette Basin and outside Oregon from sources all over the world. You know, this could be from, you know, forest fires, cement processes, burning, like coal-fired plants, you know, wildfires. So there's many sources, and it gets into the air, moves across all over the world, and then lands on trees, lands on the ground. And so what Priscilla had mentioned earlier, really our primary implementation strategy is keeping the dirt out of the water for the most part. So reducing erosion and runoff to water bodies. So mercury can attach to sediment. It can also be dissolved in runoff, and that is how it's getting into our waterways. So what we have to do here is we can't prevent it from coming into Oregon, although, you know, EPA is also one of our designated management agencies. And so, you know, any kind of efforts that they can do and work with, whether it's, you know, the United Nations Environmental Program or other international organizations to help and try and reduce atmospheric deposition of mercury, you know, that's, you know, they can work at it from their end as well. So what we can do here is just try and prevent whatever lands on the ground from getting into the water. So that's really what we're trying to do here. And we have huge reductions. There's no way around this. There are huge reductions of total mercury needed. And this 88 to 96% reduction, that is based on subbasins. So there's 12 subbasins in the Willamette Basin, and EPA's TMDL has percent reductions associated with each of those 12 subbasins. And so that ranges from 88 to 96% reductions. So a great, there's quite large reductions will be needed to meet our standards over time. Our TMDL timeline. So some of you, I know some of you have been very familiar with this TMDL over the years, but for some of you, this might be familiar or not familiar. But we did start the TMDL development process back in, gosh, the end of 2017. And we met with an advisory committee and had meetings for about a year and a half or so. And our last advisory committee meeting was in June of 2019. And then in November of 2019, DEQ developed a TMDL. That TMDL, though, was disapproved by EPA, and EPA had been working with us all along. They had helped support the TMDL development, but EPA did disapprove the TMDL, and that was based after they determined that the load and the waste load allocations, those are the point source and the non-point source load allocations, that were based on percent reductions across the entire basin. So DEQ had basically averaged over all the entire basin a percent reduction, but EPA believed that that was not going to be protective and would not meet reductions needed at each of the sub-basin levels. So they did disapprove it. The following month in December, they developed their TMDL. That went out for public comment. There were some delays in that, and part of that was an administration change. But in February of this year, they did issue their final TMDL. And we'll talk a little bit about their final TMDL and those waste load allocations and load allocations associated with it in some following workshops. But the gist of it is the effective allocations, the TMDL allocations that are effective are located in EPA's TMDL. So you need to look there for those allocations. DEQ's water quality management plan, those are the effective management measures that we will be implementing. So those are effective. So you need to look to DEQ's water quality management plan for implementation. In March of 2021, you should have all received, maybe not into every single one of you, but your agencies all received a letter. It was a notification letter, and that was sent after EPA had issued their final TMDL. So in that letter, that's where we notify you as a DMA or a responsible person And that the date of that letter was the trigger, so to speak, to set the 18-month time frame. So 18 months from the March of 21 is September 3rd of 2022. That is when your TMDL implementation plans are due. And one thing that I want to note here, so your plans are due September 3rd of 2022, but they really need to be approvable, kind of quote unquote here. So the idea with that is that we don't want to see just kind of a first draft, so to speak, in September. We want to be working with all of you prior to that September deadline, so that we're able to review some of your draft plans or provide input, or if you have questions about what's in your implementation plans, we want to work with you prior to that. So then when it comes to the September deadline, if you're not there, you're just about there in terms of being approvable. So as Steve mentioned in the beginning, we do have upcoming workshops. So next week already, we have a workshop that's geared towards the non-permitted stormwater management agencies. So these are the cities that do not have MS4 permits. So these MS4 permits are the municipal separate storm sewer system permits given through DEQ, and usually those are to some of the larger cities. So if you're an MS4, this workshop is not for you. It's for these cities that don't have an MS4 permit, and we will talk about your stormwater management requirements. The May 25th workshop then is focused towards the MS4s. So if you are an MS4, you are going to want to attend this workshop. We will have several MS4 staff there as well, who will be able to answer specific questions about the TMDL requirements that are going into the phase 1 permits, and already, I guess, in the phase 2 permits. And then Priscilla and I will be talking about the non-point source stormwater requirements associated with the Mercury TMDL with the MS4s as well. The next workshop in June is focused for counties. So counties have some unique implementation requirements in the water quality management plan. So if you are a county, please go to this one. If you are a county and you are also an MS4, which is pretty much all the counties except for I think 2 counties, you will want to go to both the MS4 and the county workshops. And then the last one is specific to the water conveyance entity. So as Priscilla was saying earlier on, there's like 44 irrigation drainage districts that were named as responsible persons in this TMDL. So if you were in that group, you'll definitely want to go to this one. I think it'll be a really good introduction into some of the requirements, and it's a great opportunity to ask questions. So please go to these following workshops. And my last slide is just to quickly introduce the basin coordinators in the Willamette Basin. We know Priscilla. Priscilla was, talking and giving a presentation at the beginning. She focuses on the upper Willamette, and she works with the DMAs up there. So this is kind of going from the upper Willamette down to the lower Willamette. And then we have Nancy Gramlich right in the middle of Main Stem, North Sandy Am, Pudding, and Yamhill subbasins. And then Roxy Nair works in the Clackamas and Molalla subbasins. She also works in the Sandy, but that's outside the Willamette Basin. And then Brian Krutzberg in the Tualatin subbasin. And then myself, I'm in the lower part of the subbasin. So please, again, I think that's been kind of a theme for this, is please reach out to your basin coordinators if they have not reached out to you yet. Some of us have many DMAs that we work with. So again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. I think otherwise we are at our question period. So I don't know if we got any questions in the chat.
Yeah, there's a couple. Let's see here. Couple here related to kind of implementation reporting timelines. With the next Willamette 5-year TMDL report due in 2023, does that mean our initial 5-year plan is only around 2 years and the first 5-year report is only for 2 years?
You know, it might even be less than that actually, because if it's due in 2022, and then you would have 2023. So part of it depends on when you're submitting your 5-year review. So it kind of depends, and the basin coordinators will probably have to talk about this a little bit. But generally the last one, it was towards the end of 2023. So you might have only had maybe 1 year of implementation under your belt, so to speak. So for that one, I would anticipate you're probably not going to have a lot of implementation actions associated with Mercury. For some of you who are veterans, you're going to have other implementation efforts to report out on. And some of you have been already implementing the Mercury TMDL. But some of these new requirements in the water quality management plan are a little different. They're more specific. So again, you might just have about 1 year's worth of information. And we'll probably have something that would allow you to say something like that. Or as basin coordinators, we'll also know that it's only been about a year. So that's a good question.
So similarly, won't the updated implementation plans due within 18 months essentially reset the 5-year review timelines for DMAs?
You know, we're not actually, what we're trying to do is keep it on a 5-year schedule. So 2018, 2023, 2028, and keeping it to 5 years, because what we have done in the past is, you know, you could reset that, but the thing is that it's also when you approve your plan. So not all the plans are necessarily going to be approved September 3rd of 2022. It's going to take some time for the basin coordinator to review. And so what happens when you do that, it keeps getting offset. So it might take sometimes a year to fully approve. Hopefully it won't take that long, but it can. And so then everyone has different 5-year timelines. And so what we're trying to do is we keep it on 2018. Again, there's some exceptions here. 2018, 2023, when we collect that information as part of the 5-year review, we're able to get more DMA information as part of the DMA or part of the 5-year reports. If we get them staggered, it's hard to collect all that data and put it into a report. So that's why we're trying to keep to a 5-year review, knowing that this first one's going to be shorter. There's not as much implementation. I don't know, Priscilla, if you have any input on that one.
No, just people need to stay flexible and just understand that, you know, when your report due date is due, just submit your report with the information that you have available to share. And, you know, let us on this end worry about how these timelines are lining up or not lining up. The important thing is that you submit your reports when they're due, and we will do our due diligence to make sure that that information we're collecting is compiled and shared back with you in a way that's helpful for us all to understand how implementation is progressing.
All right, next, how will let's see here, I'm going to do 2 questions. How will the reductions be accomplished? If you were an agency tasked with this level of reduction, how would you accomplish this task?
Well, you know, as a DMA, you're responsible for implementing your TMDL implementation plan. So that's what we're looking at. Are you implementing the actions contained in your TMDL implementation plan? And that's how we assess sufficiency of implementing. We will also be monitoring, right? Because you have your TMDL implementation actions that are occurring. And so that's what we're measuring with each of the DMAs. But across the basin, we'll be looking at how are those implementation actions resulting in in water results. So is total mercury in the water column decreasing? When we test fish tissue, is methyl mercury levels decreasing? So we'll need to be doing that. DEQ is an agency, and potentially other DMAs. We need to talk more about that in terms of the monitoring to know whether the actions on the ground are actually leading to water quality improvements.
Thank you. Let's see here. Will there be another date set for the non-permitted DMAs if the May 11th meeting doesn't work?
If the May 11th meeting doesn't work, why won't it work?
It works for me. I'll be there, Andrea. Don't worry. I'll be there.
Oh, I see. You mean if you can't attend it? Or is that what
I think that's what it means. Yeah, if they can't attend. Yeah.
The deadline stays the same. You know, if you can't make it to that meeting for one reason or another, it's not the end of the world. It will be helpful for you. But if you can't, you know, just reach out. I would recommend definitely read the water quality management plan. Read through it. Look at the non-permitted section so you know what those requirements are, and then connect with your basin coordinator if you have any questions about any of them. So we're still here. The dates remain the same, but we're here to answer your questions.
And a recording will be available too. So there will be a recording for all of these sessions that we'll make available after they're completed.
All right. Is there any thought of creating a model code or set of BMPs that could be adopted by smaller jurisdictions as their TMDL plan?
We have model code available on our website. If you go to our implementation planning and guidance webpage, there is some model code there that is specific to stormwater management. So if you're looking for model code related to the temperature TMDL and riparian strategies, I don't think we have something like that up on our website, but in terms of stormwater management, you can find some on our webpage.
Yeah, and you know, there's some great resources out there. I think like the Center for Watershed Protection and some of the other MS4s that have been doing similar. So for the non-permitted MS4s, I won't go into the, you know, the details here, but a lot of their stormwater management requirements are similar to the MS4 requirements, just not as prescriptive. There's a lot of experience out there developing these codes. And so I would just encourage you to reach out to folks that have been doing this kind of work over the years. There's a lot of resources out there.
What date should we turn in our first matrix if the finished product is 9/2022?
Is 9, okay, what was that? So if
that would be September.
Oh, is the annual report you're saying when? Could you read that again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, what date should we turn in our first matrix if the finished product is September 2022?
Gotcha.
I think they mean drafts.
Or do they mean annual report? After you're saying it's September 22 is when the TMDL implementation plan is due. So are they talking about a reporting matrix so that
they're asking for a draft?
For the draft?
Andy, need to have those reports before 9/22 so that they're approvable on 9/22. We need to tell our managers a date probably so they can put council meetings together and approvals and stuff like that. I think that's the question.
Okay, so you mean for the TMDL, not the report, but the TMDL implementation plan is September. So you're saying to plan ahead to meet that September 22 date.
Well, to meet, what do you want to see? You said you want to see them in advance of that date.
Yeah, I would work with your basin coordinator to see what the point of that kind of discussion was. I don't think, like, basin coordinators generally, we don't want to see your first version on September 3rd. We want to see versions beforehand. So I would work with your basin coordinator specifically on that. And you're with, Andy, who are you with? The city of? Mal-
I'm city of Malala. I think probably there's others that have the same question. So, we'll turn in obviously the final version of the Mercury TMDL, whether that's an appendix or whether that's the full plan, on 9/23 or probably before that. But what I don't want to have happen to me is, hey, boss, we got to get this on the January council set up and got to get it done and get it over to Priscilla. And then they turn around and say, it's not due till September, Andy.
My recommendation would be to get that first draft in like sometime this summer or early fall. Because chances are you're going to go through a couple iterations before you get to a place where I get back to you and say, yeah, I think this looks like an approvable plan. Go ahead and submit. So my recommendation would be get that first draft in within the next, 3 to 6 months. And there'll be a turnaround time there. Take some review time on the Basin coordinator side to get back to you with some recommendations. But I think if you get a first draft in, this next quarter, that's going to be setting you up for a timely submittal come September 2022. I know all my DMAs have heard this because I've set up a lot of meetings, and so I know all the Upper Willamette DMAs have already sort of been encouraged to operate on that timeline.
Are new DMA implementation plans required to address all 303D listed pollutants for waters that might be affected, or just mercury?
That's a good question. It's just for mercury. So it's people who are named as a DMA. If you're named as a DMA in a TMDL, then you're responsible for developing a TMDL implementation plan for that pollutant. So for the folks on, today's workshop, if you're a new DMA, it's because you were named as a DMA for the Mercury TMDL, which means you need to develop a TMDL implementation plan only for Mercury. Bless you.
Excuse me. Couldn't hit mute fast enough. Wanted to pause here. Gordon put a question mark in the chat box. I wanted to give him an opportunity to unmute and ask a follow-up question. Gordon?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
I honestly, I'm a little disappointed with the response. I don't think you really answered my question. My question was basically, how are we going to accomplish these tasks? And you said by implementing, through your implementation plan. Well, we're talking about 80 and 90% reductions in a pollutant that is predominantly deposited in our waterways by air. It comes from airborne sources. As a DMA, we have a limited jurisdiction. As a public works agency, my jurisdiction ends at the right-of-way line. I don't have any power over what people do out in their farm fields. I can't storm onto somebody's property and claim that they're illegally dumping mercury. And we don't have the money or the personnel to become an enforcement agency in that regard. And I'm just really curious how this task is going to be accomplished, given the limitations that we have in terms of funding, in terms of personnel, and in terms of ability to actually even do nominal testing of 303D listed substances. I mean, like we're at the absolute limit of our ability to comply when we're sort of formulating a way of testing temperature. I'm just at a loss as to how you expect us to be able to accomplish this when we don't have any money to do it, we don't have any people to do it, and we don't have any authority to do it. So I don't know. I'm obviously frustrated.
I think we understand that, and we realize that the reductions are huge. But the math and the science stand alone, right? We know from the water quality data and the modeling that these are the reductions that we have to have if we want to meet our water quality standard. So that's separate from this question of, well, how do we do it? We know what we have to do to meet the water quality standard, but how do we do it and can we do it? You know, is a really important question. But the science stands on, you know, on its own. And even though it seems insurmountable, we still have to try. And so what I think all agencies have been challenged with, including our own, is what are you doing and can you do more? We have authorities, counties have authorities to enforce land use regulations. Counties have authorities to protect the riparian area. Counties have authorities to regulate development and address post-construction stormwater controls. So these are areas where we are already doing a lot of implementation, but we have to find ways to do what we're doing better or do more of what we're already doing. And I know from the last Willamette Basin 5-year review that not all of our DMAs have a post-construction stormwater program. They should, and we need to be working towards that. And that's gonna help us progress in implementing this TMDL. Not all DMAs have very good riparian protections in place. They should, and the TMDL should push you toward stronger riparian protections. Not all DMAs have certain requirements in place with their construction stormwater program controls. Those requirements need to get in place and they need to be enforced. Staffing and funding those things will be difficult. That will be difficult, and we do understand that. But the Federal Clean Water Act and Oregon Administrative Rule requires us to try. And you know, that's where we feel that the flexibility of the implementation plan helps us meet you where you are in your abilities to implement these different strategies. Will they be enough? That's what the water quality monitoring is going to tell us over the next number of decades. And it's going to take that long for us to know if what we're doing is working.
Yeah, and Priscilla, I think that that's exactly right. And also maybe just getting to Gordon's concern too, is that you are not responsible for upstream pollution like mercury coming into your jurisdiction. So just so you know, we have 172 DMAs. We have Department of Ags, we have, you know, Forest Service, BLM, a lot of different agencies involved with this. So you're not responsible for reducing mercury coming into your jurisdiction. You're just responsible for implementing what you can to reduce sediment and runoff containing mercury into waterways in your jurisdiction. So that's the part that you're responsible for.
So I would like to say that I understand the science. I get it. And I'm aware of exactly how severe the circumstances are. I'm not denying any of that. But there are practicalities that I don't think are necessarily being addressed. And this phrase gets bandied about quite often in these regards, but it is real. It's an unfunded mandate. It is a task that we have been given for which we have no revenue to produce results. And I am not questioning the merit of this mandate at all. I understand exactly how dire this situation is, but you cannot get blood out of a turnip. And that is the bottom line. And to be honest, it is one thing to create riparian protections and post-construction stormwater plans and to implement LID processes. It's another thing to enforce and maintain them long-term. Just the enforcement element of those actions is a full-time job.
Mhm.
And to be honest, we don't have room in our budget for another FTE. So this money has to come from somewhere, because otherwise it's not going to get done. And that is really the bottom line of what I'm saying. It's not that I don't want to do it. It's not that I don't think it needs to be done. I recognize that completely. I'm just saying, how are we going to make it happen? That's the only thing I got.
Yeah, that funding piece is going to be really challenging. I did, Joe, just get a great reminder from one of our watershed partners that, you know, watershed councils and soil and water conservation districts and these other partners do make for awesome collaborative efforts and open your eligibility and your access to various funding sources. So it's not going to solve all of your funding problems, but if you can incorporate working with your watershed partners like watershed councils, that could help close some part of that implementation funding gap.
All right, we still have a couple more questions. Let's see here. Is the DMA responsible for TMDL testing within the local tributary basin to be able to demonstrate impact of maintenance, or will DEQ do this local basin testing?
Oh, that's a good question. This is like water quality testing. You know, generally not in the water quality management plan. We haven't directed DMAs to collect samples. You know, I mentioned we do have a draft monitoring framework document that's on our website that we still need to have more discussions about, and maybe potentially DMAs, some of the larger DMAs may collect data as part of that effort, but we haven't had those discussions yet. I think generally for those smaller DMAs, we don't have those expectations that you'll be collecting in water data.
Here we have an observation here. Yes, a model for smaller DMAs of BMPs would be great, since the DEQ monitoring strategy to support implementation of the Willamette TMDL does not seem to care of the size of the DMA. Rather than a vague adjustable plan per DMA, how about a list of what is required, and everyone, I just lost it. Everyone is required to follow.
That list exists. We have all those BMPs written in the water quality management plan. So if you're wondering what types of things you need to implement, it's in the water quality management plan. We've shared those.
All right, I did that one. Regarding logging activity within the TMDL basin areas, is this activity also being targeted for additional runoff controls, since this is a much larger contributory area than the urbanized areas of particular DMAs?
Yeah, you know, absolutely. So, you know, I mentioned the Forest Service, the BLM, the Oregon Department of Forestry, they all are going to have plans in terms of what they can do to reduce sediment. And some of it might be harvesting practices. They'll also likely focus on their road management. Roads can definitely contribute to a lot of sediment in those forested areas.
That's it for the questions right now. Does anybody else have anything burning that they want to ask? And again, reminder that you're welcome to email me.
This is Gordon again. I just want to thank you for at least engaging on these subjects. These are things that I've been thinking about for a really long time. And one of the reasons that I'm here today is really just to refresh myself, remember where we are with our TMDL program, to get ready for the, for the addition of the Mercury. And I thought it was important to at least express those frustrations that we've felt, or those challenges that we have, that we've faced at the front end with some of the folks who are just joining this process, so that they at least were aware that there were other folks who were confronting the same issues. So I didn't mean to seem grumpy.
No, thank you. No, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Gordon. No, it's okay to put us in the hot seat and to question the process. That's us thinking through things, and that's really important. And so appreciate you putting that out for discussion and giving us an opportunity to kind of share our thoughts on it. And I should let everyone know on the phone that Gordon and his team at Benton County have been incredible partners over the last number of years that we worked on implementation, and they're doing some really great work. So
thank you for that.
His questions do not indicate a lack of implementation on their part. Benton County is doing some really great stuff.
All right, we've got Shane Sanderson with a question. Go ahead, Shane.
Just a comment / question, but it's interesting seeing how we implement on these issues east of the Mississippi and west of the Mississippi, because I've done both. A lot of state DNRs or DEQs here would call this, an unfunded mandate given to the state by the feds, and then given to the locals by the state. We did acquire a lot of Healthy Communities grants and other programs from EPA, and then divided it to the tune of, the cost of a summer intern, for example, that we would then send at the county level out to enforce the like silt fences and runoff prevention and construction projects and a few other things. And it was an imperfect system, but it was also 1/8 the cost of a full FTE. And of course, they learned pretty quickly that we weren't around enforcing through most of the year, but during the summer they better behave, or during the early spring they better behave and stuff. But I mean, this is one of those things, I think, where we have to do the best we can. We're probably not going to achieve the 96% reduction.
96%.
Just let's be realistic, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try, I think, is one of the overall messages. But I think that there is some creativity that's possible. I mean, I know we increased the cost of our stormwater permits too, and included, I don't know, $100 for this program, but started to line item it out separately and did talk to our state representatives. Once we had it line itemed out and we were able to say, this is the cost, did talk to some of our state representatives. So, I think that there's some opportunities, but coming from EPA, I don't think that it's going to go anywhere anytime soon. So we're all kind of in that same boat with having no money to do this, but got to figure it out anyway.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No, thanks for that comment, Shane.
I just would add
Anybody
to
else?
that I think this is where that outreach and education component is really important. If our community wants clean water, then as a community, myself in a community, has to get to the point where paying for those beneficial uses is valuable to me. And changing people's behavior or encouraging them to support certain efforts that may result in them incurring a surcharge or some type of system development charge on a utility bill they get every month. Going out there and telling the story and getting people to come along for the ride is going to be really important, because we can't do this without the support of the communities that we're trying to provide good water for. And at some point, as communities, we're going to have to want to pay to support protecting our water quality.
All right, last call.
We still have till 12:30. For those of you that want to stay long, we're here.
Well, it looks like our participant ticker list is slowly going down in numbers. So
I think we peaked out at 123.
That's awesome.
Well, on behalf of all the speakers today, I want to thank everybody for joining us and for participating and asking such great, thoughtful questions. Really, you are all key to helping us protect and improve water quality here in Oregon. We will be posting this presentation at a future date. And as Andrea said, we'll send out a follow-up email with some links.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you again soon.
Right.
Bye.